Posing for portrait photography. Based on the second edition of the book, Posing for Portrait Photography, a head-to-toe guide for digital photographers by Jeff Smith. Posing the human body for portraiture is one of the most challenging aspects of professional photography. So what makes one arrangement of body parts look so graceful, while another looks so awkward? That's the subject of this seminar. But before we look at the mechanics of posing, there are some things to keep in mind if we hope to work successfully with our clients and sell our images. First, we need to take a comprehensive approach. Many times, an image with an overall nice pose starts to fall apart as you notice problems that should have been dealt with during the posing process. My approach is to pose every part of the body to make it look its best. Then combine all the body parts that will be showing in the frame into a complete pose. Complicating the inherent challenges of posing is the reality that we, as professional photographers, work with people of all different shapes and sizes. You might be able to make a perfect model look great during a test session, but using those same poses with most of your average customers will produce unsaleable portraits. That's why I think it's important to teach you not just how to design a pose, but also why certain posing decisions may be right for one client and wrong for another. Learning posing in the traditional manner, learning an entire pose and replicating it simply doesn't work most of the time. Learning to build poses rather than to replicate poses will enable you to address your clients' problem areas and achieve complete poses that your clients will be thrilled to buy. I admit that building a pose is a little more difficult than memorizing a pose, but things that are easy rarely make you successful. Also keep in mind that posing is subjective. In a recent blog post, I displayed this image as part of a lesson about hiding the tummy area and hips. There were many positive comments left by photographers. One comment, however, was that her arms looked large because she wore a sleeveless top. While I agree, I also live in a hot climate where getting women to wear long sleeves is a constant challenge. But here's the important part. The client was amazed at how good she looked and purchased a large wall portrait. Impressing our clients is much more important to building a successful business than impressing other photographers. You must select a pose based on the needs and tastes of the individual client. Accordingly, tradition is another old friend of photographers that must be dealt with. The outdated and obsolete theories of posing taught to young photographers as a start for learning classic art theory are hard to get past. It's important to understand that classic posing theories came from a different place and a much different time. For instance, in the era that inspired many of our posing theories, women were expected to be passive and submissive. Look around. Do you see any passive, submissive women around today? Nope. The posing style that was all the rage hundreds of years ago doesn't really apply to the women of today. Women who still want to look feminine, but also smart and confident. We could all benefit by keeping in mind that we're in a creative profession, and there isn't a single best way. The best way to do something is quite simply the way that makes your client happy. And what makes one client happy will not necessarily make another client happy. The most effective way to make clients happy is to ask them what they want. Before the session starts, talking with the client about sample photographs can help you define the type of portrait and posing they have in mind, and this will start you in the right direction. When you take the time to learn about your client, you can create portraits that are tailored to their tastes, instead of trying to sell them on purchasing portraits that are tailored to yours. When it comes to posing, Many photographers get overwhelmed because they focus on increasing the number of poses they offer when they would be better off improving the quality of these poses and the speed at which they direct their clients into them. Once the current poses are mastered, then you can look at developing new poses. One of the best learning tools for posing is to show poses to clients by posing yourself. At first, you might feel a little awkward, which is exactly how the client feels. But when you can consistently demonstrate poses and make yourself look good, you're starting to master posing. After you've demonstrated the pose, watch the client attempt to get into it. Many times they won't identically replicate what you showed them, but they will come up with a new variation that is more comfortable for them, and that you can add to your pose selections. Variations are simple, effective changes you can make in a single pose to give it a completely different look. This is an exercise I make every photographer in my studio, including myself, undertake in every session. It provides practice in posing by maximizing each of the poses you know. It also gives your client the greatest variety from each pose they do. By making small changes, countless variations become possible. In these photographs, you can see how variations work. You start out with a basic pose and come up with a variety of options for the placement of the face and body. This takes one posing idea you know and turns it into 5 or 10 different poses. Demonstrating posing variations also helps your client to relax in the pose. Just think of yourself doing any new task. You feel kind of nervous, especially if you have to look your best at the same time. Wouldn't you appreciate someone guiding you rather than just telling you, "Go stand over there"? We always need to put ourselves in our client's shoes. Instead of trying to learn hundreds of totally different poses right off the bat, the best way to get started is by learning to check each pose for what I call the 6 deadly sins of posing. If you make sure that a pose doesn't contain these 6 things, the pose will be saleable. I, like most photographers, work with a lighting ratio that is approximately 3:1 without diffusion and 4:1 with diffusion. This means if the face is turned away from the light, the shadow on the side of the nose will increase, making the nose appear larger. If you turn the face toward the main light source, you light the face without increasing the shadowing in areas where it shouldn't be. Turning the head also stretches out the neck and reduces the appearance of a double chin, if the subject has one. The widest view of any person is when the person is squared off to the camera. By turning the shoulders, waist, and hips to a side view, preferably toward the shadow side of the frame, you can create the thinnest view of the body, and we all want to look as thin as possible. When the arms are allowed to hang down to the side of a client, the body isn't defined. It's one mass, making the body appear wider. When the elbows are away from the body, the waistline is defined and appears smaller. Strong catch lights in the eyes are critical. To achieve them, the main light should be adjusted with each client and in each pose. I suggest elevating the main light to a point where it's obviously too high, with no apparent catch light. Then, slowly lower it until the proper lighting effect is achieved. This forces you to adjust the light with each pose and ensures there'll always be visible catch lights in the eyes. To complete the lighting, add a reflector underneath the subject, bouncing light up onto the face. In a portrait where the shoulders are perfectly horizontal or the spine is perfectly vertical, the person in the portrait appears stiff. Visually, you're telling everyone who sees this portrait that your client is uptight and very rigid. If you pose the person reclining slightly backwards or leaning slightly forwards, the shoulders and spine go diagonally through the frame for a more relaxed look. The portrait will look professional, and it will create a more flattering impression of the subject's personality. This is by far the most important of the rules. One of the first photography aphorisms I ever heard was, "Expression sells photographs." And it's true. You can have the perfect pose and the perfect lighting, but if the expression doesn't meet the client's expectations, you won't sell the portrait. The best way to achieve the expression you want is through mirroring. Subjects will unconsciously replicate the mood on your face. So when you want a smile on the subject's face, you should smile and speak in an upbeat voice. When you want a more serious expression, use a more subdued voice and don't smile. In this way, you are in control of every client's expression. The posing of a portrait for a parent should be much different than the posing of a portrait for a husband or boyfriend. Likewise, a business portrait would be taken with a different look than a portrait that reflects the subject as she is in her off-duty hours. Yet, while there are many reasons why a portrait might be taken, photographers too often approach posing in only one way. If you want to get beyond basic posing, you need to identify the reason the client wants the portrait taken and pose them accordingly. This is the missing step in most photography businesses. Even the best photographer in the world isn't good enough to give the client what they want without first finding what that is. Traditional posing is used for portraits for business, yearbooks, people of power, and people of distinction. This style of portrait reflects power and, to some degree, wealth, respect, and a classic elegance. In these images, the posing is more linear, with only slight changes in the angles of the body. Most of the time, these clients will feel more comfortable in a standing rather than a seated position, mostly because of the clothing they're in. Still, the subject's arms shouldn't rest on the sides of the body. An elbow can rest on a chair or other posing aid, or the hands can be put into the pockets, but not so deep as to have the arms against the sides of the body. The expressions should be more subtle as well. Laughing smiles are definitely not appropriate. But at the same time, serious expressions need to be relaxed. Most people taking traditional portraits aren't comfortable doing so, and therefore have a tendency to scowl. This needs to be avoided. In casual posing, the body is positioned as it would be when we're relaxing. Study people as they're watching TV, talking on the phone, or on a picnic to start developing casual poses for your clients. These poses are used when the portrait is to be given to friends and relatives. Casual poses are resting poses. The arms rest on the legs. The chin rests on the hands. The back is posed at more of an angle. It's common to use the ground to pose, laying back on the side or even on the stomach. The purpose is to capture people as they really are. The third type of posing is glamorous posing, designed to make the subject look as appealing and attractive as possible. I'm not talking about having them in little or no clothing. You can pose a fully clothed person and make them look extremely appealing. If you finish the pose with the right expression, often with the lips slightly parted, you will have made the client's romantic interest very happy. An excellent source of glamorous posing is found in catalogs such as those published by Victoria's Secret or Fredericks of Hollywood. The photographers who create these images are masters of making the human form look good to the opposite sex. Your client will just have more clothing on. The purpose of defining each type of posing, as well as determining the reason the portrait is being taken, is to have a direction for the session. At this point, the photographer's own style and experience take over. Selecting the right clothing and setting goes hand in hand with posing. It's only when the pose is combined with the proper clothing, in the proper setting, and with the appropriate expression that the portrait attains a sense of style. Only when everything in a portrait makes sense visually do you achieve a portrait that really works. Achieving this requires that you look at every aspect of the portrait and match each element to the others. The style of clothing is very easy to start with. Most photographers, no matter how fashion impaired they are, can tell the difference between casual clothing, business clothing, and elegant clothing. This clothing needs to be paired with a setting or scene that reflects the same style. When choosing a setting, the predominant lines and textures are what visually communicate its overall feeling, so be sure to evaluate these carefully. A background that has strong, straight lines communicates a sense of structure and strength. Because of the traditional associations, linear backgrounds are often considered more masculine. Backgrounds that have curved lines provide a softer, more artistic look and are often considered to be more feminine. For example, think of the columns commonly used as set elements by photographers. Rounded columns would be considered more feminine, while squared columns would be considered more masculine. This does not, however, mean that you should only use feminine backgrounds when creating portraits of female subjects. As noted previously, many of the traditional ideas about what's feminine and what's masculine just don't apply to the tastes of today's clients. When you go outdoors, coordinating the clothing and posing to the scene to achieve an overall sense of style becomes easier. A typical park or garden scene is a more casual setting. Therefore, more casual clothing and posing are required. An outdoor setting with columns and fountains is obviously more elegant and requires more elegant clothing. Clothing is an excellent guide as to the type of posing that should be used. When a young lady is wearing a pair of shorts, barefoot, with a summery top on, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that casual posing is called for. When a girl changes into a nice dress, again, it isn't difficult to know that you should switch to a more glamorous posing style to suit the clothing. Of course, you can also decide to use a style of posing that isn't the obvious choice. But you need to make sure that everything in the portrait comes together to visually make sense. It's also important to keep in mind that almost everyone has something in their appearance that they would change if they could. There are two general types of problems that you'll come across when working with your clients. These are imagined problems and the real problems. The imagined problems are normally found in very attractive, very photogenic clients. Usually these problems are very slight. Most of the time, the person who has these problems is the only one who can actually see them without a lot of careful searching. These problems are the hardest to correct because most photographers never take the time to speak with their clients about such issues before the session. Since no problems are readily apparent, the photographer doesn't give it a second thought. A typical imagined problem is something like, one of my eyes is smaller than the other. One of my ears is lower than the other. Or my smile seems crooked. As you look for this freakish abnormality, you have to study the problem for several minutes to figure out what on earth the client is talking about. Women are more prone to imagined problems than men because they feel they have to live up to a fashion magazine standard, and because they tend to wear clothing that is more revealing than men's clothing. This means any minor figure problems they have are much more obvious. The real problems are the issues that each and almost every one of us has. We're never as thin as we would like. We think our noses are too large, our ears stick out too much, and our eyes are too big or too small. These problems are easier for most photographers to correct because they're more easily identified as things that need to be disguised in the final portrait. But whether they're imagined or real, these concerns need to be addressed if the session is to be profitable. In general, guys want to look buff, not scrawny or chubby. Though few will admit it, most guys worry about their nose being larger than they'd like, their ears sticking out a little too far, or both. If the guys are at all heavy, they'll also be concerned with the neck area or double chin. A woman with any kind of weight problem will worry about the width of her face, the neck area or double chin, large shoulders, the size of her upper arms, and the size of everything else down to the bottoms of her feet. For the average-size woman, the face and neck are usually not a problem. Even thin women, though, worry about the size of their upper arms or dark hair showing on their forearms. For those concerns, long sleeves are an easy solution. Most ladies with a normal bust want their chest to appear at least as large as it is. In most cases, it's safe to say that if a woman's bust appears slightly larger than it is in reality, it'll probably be appreciated. Many times, however, a pose will make the bust appear uneven, which is just about the worst thing you can do. Women also want their waists to appear as thin as possible. If the subject has a tummy bulge, she doesn't want to see it. In general, the only part of the uncovered leg to show in portraits is from slightly above the knee to the ankle. Of course, the legs should look like they have good muscle tone and not show any signs of cellulite. Even a thin woman will often worry about the appearance of her hips and thighs. Unless you're a woman, or are married to one, you may not realize how much women worry about this area of their bodies. It's also generally an area where extra weight is very apparent. To some photographers, this may seem overwhelming. After all, how are you supposed to figure out how to make all that look good? There is good news. I've never met a person who had all these issues. Fortunately, everyone has attractive qualities in their appearance. That is the idea here. Hide the imperfections and focus the viewer's attention on the subject's most appealing attributes. If your client has beautiful eyes, focus on those beautiful eyes. If they have a terrific smile that lights up the room, make that the centerpiece of the portrait. If she's got great legs, show them off. Like everything you learn, this process will take some time in the beginning, but you'll get faster and faster at analyzing what you need to hide or minimize, and what you need to focus the viewer's attention on. Photographers don't usually spend a lot of time thinking about how to talk with their clients without offending them. I've heard photographers issue instructions like, "Sit your butt here," or "Stick out your chest," or even, "Suck it in just before I take the picture so your belly doesn't show as much." I'm sure the subjects who were instructed this way didn't feel very comfortable with their chosen photographers. Whether you're discussing a client's problems or directing them into poses, there are certain words that are unprofessional to use in reference to your client's bodies. In place of butt, choose bottom or seat. Never say crotch. Just tell the client how to move so that this area isn't a problem. Instead of "stick out your chest," say "arch your back." Replace "suck in your stomach" with an instruction to breathe in just before I take the portrait. To direct a client for a sexy look, simply have the subject make direct eye contact with the camera. Lower her chin and breathe through her lips so there's a slight separation between them. The face is the most important part of any portrait. Some portraits have the face in silhouette or obscured from view in one form or another. But this is usually an artistic exercise for the photographer. Without a nice view of the face, a portrait is not saleable to the average client. The first thing to consider is the camera height. Elevated camera angles can look wonderful, but only when a face is also elevated. Failing to raise or lower the face as you raise or lower the camera position can dramatically alter the appearance of the face. I also feel that the face needs to be framed, especially as the camera is brought closer. To avoid the floating head look, where only the face is showing, bring the hands to the neck or cheek to create a base for the face to rest on. This correction can also help conceal a common problem area, the neck and chin. The eyes are critical. Even when you do everything else right, if you don't take the time to make sure the eyes are beautiful, you reduce the beauty of your client, the appeal of the portraits to the viewer, and how saleable the images will be. Unfortunately, most photographers don't really think about posing the eyes. They look at the face as a whole. But again, it is each part as well as the sum of its parts that make a good pose. A good strategy is to pose the eyes and then adjust the lighting to the pose. Typically, the center of the eye is positioned toward the corner of the eye opening. This enlarges the appearance of the eye and gives it more impact. This position is achieved by turning the face toward the main light while the eyes come back to the camera. The point at which you ask the subject to focus their gaze in respect to the camera also, in essence, poses the eye. To do this, I put my face where I want their eyes to be, usually directly over the camera. As you can see in these images, changing the direction of the subject's gaze dramatically alters the feel of the portrait. And sometimes not in flattering ways. When the eyes of the subject look into the lens, or very close to it, the portrait seems to make eye contact with the viewer. This type of portrait typically sells better than portraits that have the subject looking off-camera in a more reflective pose. Reflective posing does, however, work in some portraits. You need to offer both styles of portraits and discuss with your clients what's right for them. Even when the subject is looking off-camera, they should have a person to look at. Otherwise, their eyes may not look engaged. Also, make sure the eyes follow the line of the nose. It looks ridiculous to have the eyes looking in a different direction than the nose is pointing. Profile poses can also be used selectively. Although not every subject will have the perfect facial structure that makes a profile pose attractive. Also, when you pose the subject with their face at a greater angle to the lens, the main light must follow the angle of the face to maintain an attractive lighting pattern. The nose is not my favorite part of the body, especially since mine is on the large side, an affliction I share with many men. The two controls you have over the nose are the highlight on the top of the nose and the shadow created by the side of the nose. How big the nose looks will be determined by the size of the shadow it produces. To reduce a larger nose, turn the face more toward the main light source in traditional lighting, or in butterfly lighting, raise the intensity on the lower light or reflector. Women with larger ears tend to use long hair to cover them up. With short-haired folks, however, protruding ears will be very obvious. Men will also have no problem showing oddly shaped ears, right up until they see them in a portrait, that is. To reduce the prominence of the ears, turn the subject's face toward the main light to hide the far ear and prevent the outline of the ear from extending past the side of the head. Reducing the fill will reduce how noticeable the visible ear is, hiding it in a shadow. Photographers, especially males photographing female subjects, often prefer to shoot non-smiling portraits. But since they aren't the ones buying the portraits, who cares what they prefer? I typically take 10 shots of each pose. 6 to 7 are smiling, and the other 3 to 4 are not. Timing is important with expression. I want clients to have smiles that range from laughing smiles to smaller grins and everything in between. The difference between a laughing smile and subtle smile is a matter of a second or less, so you must practice your timing to capture the expression you want. If a more subdued expression is desired, have the client simply relax their smile and breathe through their parted lips. Despite the rules you may have read for the masculine and feminine tilts of the head, the real rule is that there is no rule, especially when photographing women. Just tilt the head toward the shoulder that looks good. The only difference between these two portraits is the tilt of the subject's head. But what a difference it makes! When photographing a woman with long hair, I look to the hair to decide the direction the head will be tilted and the direction in which the body will be placed. Long hair is beautiful, and there must be an empty space to put it, so the tilt will go to the fuller side of the hair, and the pose will create a void on the same side for it to drape into. Guys, on the other hand, typically aren't gender benders when it comes to posing. Men typically do look better tilting their head to the classic direction, toward the lower shoulder, or not tilting it at all. But again, the pose and the circumstance should dictate your final decision. The neck is the first area of the body to show weight gain and age. Because this is such a concern for most clients, especially women, you'll notice that a great many of my portraits hide this area from view by having the subject rest their chin on their hands, arms, or shoulders. By combining a high angle with careful hand and arm posing, I was able to completely conceal any problems this client had in her neck and chin area. The result was a very flattering portrait of a beautiful young lady. If the subject has a major problem in the neck-chin area, you may need to resort to the turkey neck pose. To do this, have the subject extend their chin toward the camera to stretch out the double chin, and then bring the entire face down to further hide the neck area. The turkey neck is effective for reducing the size of a double chin, but it can also hide the bulge that appears, particularly with heavier gentlemen, when the shirt collar is a bit too snug. Typically, you don't want long hair to be behind the shoulders on both sides. Long hair is beautiful and requires constant maintenance. If the subject has gone to all that trouble, she'll want her hair to show. The exception would be for professional portraits, in which a very conservative look is needed. As I start to pose the client, I look at the way the hair flows. Typically, the hair and bangs flow to one side. This is the side of the hair you want to see. I make sure this side of the hair is on the shadow side of the frame, so we see more of it when the subject's face is turned toward the main light. Whether the hair is long or short, always look to the hair for the direction the body should be placed. This also keeps the bangs, or any other part of the hair that sweeps across the face, from producing a shadow over the eyes. Posing the human body is more involved than just learning some ways to configure the limbs. To understand how to pose a subject, you must understand how the pose harmonizes with other aspects of the photographic process to achieve the desired look or style. In a headshot, the composition of a portrait looks finished if the shoulders fill the bottom of the frame from one side to the other. If the portrait is composed showing more of the body, then the arms or legs are used to fill in the void areas at the bottom of the frame. Basically, this is completing a triangular composition, with the body forming the base of the triangle and the head as its peak. In this particular pose, you can see how the subject's bent legs form the base of a triangle, leading your eyes up to his face at the peak. Finishing the frame, is a helpful concept for photographers who have a hard time deciding where the bottom of the frame should be. I tell them to look for the bottom of the triangle and crop the portrait there. Many poses offer a photographer the ability to choose from different ways of composing the portrait. These work well in high-volume photography studios, since you don't have to repose the subject for each shot. These images show an example of a pose that can quickly be shot as full length, three-quarter length, and close-up image, giving your client plenty of options. The shoulders form the base for every head and shoulders pose you take. As mentioned previously, the base shouldn't form a horizontal line through the frame. A diagonal line makes the portrait more interesting and the subject less rigid. Lifting the shoulder closest to the camera creates an appealing look and helps hide the neck-chin area, if that is a concern. Arms often have problems that can only be hidden by clothing, which is why we suggest that everyone wear long sleeves. Models may have perfect arms, but our clients are plagued with a variety of problems. So, cover those things up. To learn how to pose the arms, watch people as they're relaxing. They fold their arms. They lean back and relax on one elbow. They lay on their stomachs and relax on both elbows, or they use their arms to rest their chin and head. When the arms will be resting on something, try to put the weight on the elbow or rest the arms very slightly on each other to avoid having the biceps or forearms mushroom out and look larger than they are. In general, the arms should be posed away from the body, not against it, and especially not pressing on it. This isn't only for the benefit of the arms, but also to define the shape of the waistline. Posing the arms carefully also gives you the ability to hide problem areas. Once the client is in the pose, I check for any areas that, if I were them, I wouldn't want to see. I might lower the face onto the arms to hide a double chin, or extend an arm forward to block the stomach area from view. In seated poses, this is an area where even thin subjects can get a little ripple from snug pants. This technique is amazingly effective. Any clue what you're not seeing in this pose? Yes, this is the same woman on the same day. Using careful posing, I was able to completely conceal that she was soon to be a mom. If I could do that, imagine how many everyday appearance issues you could hide from your clients. The key to good posing is being observant. Many photographers are in too much of a hurry to start snapping off pictures. Now that we're shooting digital, I tell my photographers to take one shot and wait for that image to completely download and be visible on the tethered computer screen. At that point, I want them to study the image for at least 10 seconds. By forcing them to take the time to notice problems in posing, lighting, and expression, the number of obvious problems have gone down considerably. Generally, the hands of both men and women photograph best when they have something to hold on to. They photograph worse when they're left dangling. Fortunately, the hands are one area of the body that clients usually pose very well on their own, if you explain where they're to place them or what they are to hold. If you watch people relaxing, in fact, you'll see that they tend to fold their hands or rest them on their body, instinctively avoiding the uncomfortable and unflattering dangling positions. Place the body and arms where you want them. Then find a place for the hands to rest or something for them to hold. Hands hold and they rest. They shouldn't look like they're broken or take on the shape of a cow's udder with fingers hanging down. Following this rule simplifies the entire process, allowing you to achieve quick and flattering results while avoiding the very complex process that many photographers go through when posing the hands. Most of the time, a fist will look appropriate for a guy, but opt for a relaxed fist that doesn't make your subject look like he's about to join in on a brawl. If his knuckles are white, the fist is too tight. Women can also be photographed with their hands closed. In these portraits, keep the hands relaxed and have the subject partially extend her index finger for a softer look. I have put the bust line and waist line together because they have much in common. First, one is on top of the other, so lighting, clothing, and posing choices you make for one will affect the other. Second, photographers are normally either trying to enhance them or conceal them. If the appearance of a large bust line would be inappropriate for the type of portrait being taken, dark clothing will help reduce the appearance of size. This is also an effective strategy for concealing a larger stomach area. Beyond that, enhancing or concealing the bust line really comes down to finessing shadows. To enhance the cleavage, turn the torso away from the main light to increase the shadow. To reduce the appearance of the bust, turn the torso toward the main light to reduce the shadows. As we have already discussed, the widest view of the waistline is when the body is squared off to the camera. The narrowest view of the waistline is achieved when the body is turned to the side. So the more you turn the waist to the side, the thinner it appears, unless there's a round belly that's defined by doing so. A common problem occurs when the subject is seated and folds of skin or stomach go over the belt. Even the most athletic person you know will have a roll if you have them sit down in a tight pair of pants. To fix this, have the subject straighten their back almost to the point of arching it. This will stretch the area and flatten it out. Sometimes, a woman will want to show her entire body or outfit, even when a closer composition would be a better choice. Lying poses help in cases like this. In this pose, you can hide the stomach area by having the subject lie down on it, and then you can use the head and shoulders, along with a lower camera height, to hide much of the body behind them. Before we move on, I'd like to emphasize that, as you've probably noticed, posing involves the emotions as much as the body. You must be tactful when discussing the client's appearance and sensitive when making decisions about how they'll appear. If you fail to do this, you'll irritate or embarrass your client. You get paid to make sure your clients look their best. And by making some tactful suggestions, you can easily solve many little problems. For example, if the client brings shoes that won't photograph well, you could suggest a barefoot portrait. In addition to interpreting emotions, posing also deals with conveying them. The way in which a body flows evokes a certain look or emotion from the viewer. This is one aspect of the craft many photographers have a hard time mastering. Let's face it, a minimum wage photographer at the mall can create a roadmap of a person's face. What sets professional photographers apart is their professionalism in handling clients and their ability to create portraits that evoke an emotional response from the viewer. The key here is simply caring. When you care about your clients, you'll find yourself deeply invested in making sure each one looks their best. In this case, simply offering a refined pose with a tighter view made all the difference. Why does the first image in our discussion of hips and thighs not show the hips and thighs? It's to illustrate this point. Because women are, by and large, so concerned about their hips and thighs, most portraits should not include this part of the body. If weight is any issue at all, it's especially important to guide the client away from these poses. Simply switching to a tighter composition can help you deliver an image that the client will love, an image that showcases their best features, even when the client specifically requests a longer portrait. Creating an additional shot that's tighter gives them another, often better option when purchasing. This will help your bottom line. While many women want portraits taken to show their outfits, They most often buy those that show their face larger in the frame. The first basic rule is never to square off the hips to the camera. This is obviously the widest view. In a standing pose, rotate the hips to show a side view, turning them toward the shadow side of the frame. Just as the arms shouldn't be posed next to the body, legs at the thighs should never be posed right next to each other in standing poses. This can be done by having the client put one foot on a step or simply lift the knee so only their toe touches the ground. Just turn the body to the side and bend the leg that's closest to the camera. Alternately, you can have the client turn at an angle to the camera, put all the weight on their leg closest to the camera, and then cross the other leg over, pointing their toe toward the ground and bringing the heel of the foot up. This is effective for both men and women. In recent years, Hollywood's been making a big deal about women with curvy butts. If a woman wants to showcase her booty, design a profile view of the body. This shows the curve of her rear without showing the width of the hips and makes it easier to capture the face at a workable angle. In seated poses, have the client roll over onto the hip that is closest to the camera. This will hide their bottom behind them, along with most of one thigh. In seated poses, the legs must be differentiated. Obviously, your approach, at least to some degree, will depend on the client's clothing. If she's in a short dress, simply have her move her far leg back and bring her closer calf in front of it. If pants are worn in the seated pose, the legs can be crossed or one foot can be brought back toward the body, causing the knee to raise. Either way, you achieve the visual differentiation between the legs. In seated poses, make sure the crotch area isn't too prominent. Having a guy seated with his elbows on his knees works well because it reflects the way guys sit. It also sells well because it looks comfortable. To avoid the crotch area being in direct view of the camera, adjust your camera angle and use the arms as a blocking element. In poses that have the subject on their side, whether lying completely down or supported by one or both of their arms, the thighs need to be posed in such a way that they are either separately defined or made to taper down to the knee. A very effective way to thin the hips and add impact to the area is to have the leg closest to the ground extend straight out, while the upper leg bends at the knee, then comes down in front of the lower leg to touch the ground. This causes the hips to dramatically taper down to the knee, reducing the apparent width of the thighs. There are countless ways to successfully pose the hip area for a slim, attractive look. Which approach you should use will depend on your client and their preferences. To pose the human body effectively, you have to look for ways to cheat. When posing the hips and thighs, one of the best cheats is to use obstructions to hide the parts of the body that you know your client won't want to see. You can use a prop or portion of the set to hide the area. A well-placed pillow, plant, column, or tall grass can help you achieve a much more flattering portrait. When seniors bring in personal props, we often use them to soften the outline of the subject's body. Outdoors, placing the subject in the middle of what most photographers would call the background lets you create more of a third dimension. It also makes foreground scene elements available for hiding problem areas. A tree trunk or grass in the foreground can hide anything from large hips and stomachs to white socks and funky colored toenail polish. As you progress in your posing techniques, learn to keep your eyes open for unexpected devices to assist you. Here, some playground equipment provided an interesting foreground and background. But notice how it only allows us to see part of the subject's bodies. This is a very slimming effect that many clients will like. Only a very small percentage of the poses you take in the average session will include the feet and legs, just like every other part of the body below the waistline. If there's a reason not to include it, don't. I should also note another reason not to shoot full length. A complaint that parents often have about full-length senior portraits is that they can't see the face. This can be addressed by shooting a tighter view. Alternately, you can condense the pose by leaning the subject forward, bringing the feet up into the chair where the subject is seated, or photographing them lying down with their feet kicked up behind them. This results in a larger facial size than a traditional full-length pose, while still showing the majority of the body. Other than hips, there is no one part of the body clients seem to dislike as much as their feet. I never knew how much feet were hated until we started photographing seniors with bare feet. Some clients reacted to the idea with sheer horror. Clients don't want their feet to appear large or their toes too long. Also to be avoided are funky colors of toenail polish and long toenails, especially on the guys. If the bottom of the feet are to show, make sure they're clean. Here, the feet are included, but their appearance is minimized by keeping them away from the camera and in the shadow. Bare feet can be made to look smaller by pushing up the heels. This not only makes the feet look better, it makes them look more toned and shapely because it flexes the muscles that run down the outside of the upper and lower leg. The subject's footwear should reflect the feeling of his or her outfit. If the client is in an elegant dress, then high heels should be worn. Heels in the 3 to 3.5 inch range add an elegant look to the portrait, help the legs look great, and make the feet appear smaller. The subject's shoes need to match their clothing. Men's shoes tend to fall into two categories: professional shoes and casual shoes, so there's little chance for mistakes. Women, however, have unlimited choices in the styles of their shoes and usually own numerous pairs of shoes in any given style. As a result, they may need to change their shoes frequently during the session. A woman's legs can be a beautiful accent in a portrait. To be photographed bare, the legs should look long and lean with good muscle tone in both the upper and lower leg. The thigh should taper into the knee and the calf taper into the ankle. Legs are one of those areas of the body, like cleavage, that a woman either has or doesn't. Luckily, if a woman has beautiful legs, she'll want to show them. If she doesn't, you'll typically see it in her clothing selection. For subjects who don't want to show their legs, the solution is simple. Wear pants. Alternately, you can look for tall obstructions to camouflage the area, or take the photographs from the waist up. As noted earlier, legs appear toned when the muscles that run along the outside of the thigh and calf are flexed and visible. These muscles are more apparent when the heels are raised. So if the legs are going to show in a standing pose, the woman must be in high heels. There is no point shooting a full-length pose in flat sandals. It makes even long, toned legs look dumpy. The old saying, if you can't tone it, tan it, really holds true when it comes to the legs. If any part of the legs show, they should appear to have color. Porcelain skin doesn't work on legs. If the subject's legs are very pale, suggest that she bring nylons or use a self-tanning product. When getting new ideas for leg poses, look at fashion magazines. These are the images that set the standard of beauty for your clients. Your clients don't want to look like mannequins. They want to look like the girls on the covers of these magazines. The first advice I give to our young photographers about posing the legs is to pick a grounded leg and what I call an accent leg. The grounded leg will support the subject's weight. The accent leg, usually determined by the pose and the direction of the body, can cross over, extend out, bend, or raise up, but it can never duplicate what the grounded leg is doing. If you use this strategy, you'll have your work cut in half since you'll only need to pose one leg instead of two. Here, the foot placement, preventing one foot or leg from mirroring the other, makes the difference between a saleable pose and one that could be unappealing, classified as the toilet pose. In standing poses, the subject's weight distribution or weight shifting is very important. One mistake photographers often make is shifting the subject's weight to accent the hip closest to the camera. This only works with very thin women because it enlarges the bottom and thigh, which isn't saleable for 90% of our clients. For real women, shifting the weight onto the back foot slims the hip area. When you ask the average person to lean against a wall, they'll usually lean with their shoulder, extending their lower body out toward the camera. And that's the part of the body you don't want to emphasize by having it come closer to the camera. By instead resting the hip or bottom against the wall, the subject appears much more comfortable and their body will be much more photogenic. In seated poses, at least one foot should touch the ground. The other leg then becomes the accent leg and can be accented by crossing it over the other, bending it to raise the knee, or folding it over the back of the head. Okay, maybe not the last one, but you need to do something with it to give the pose some style and finish off the composition. There are literally hundreds of ways to make legs look good. Again, it's easier to isolate what not to do. The deadly sins of posing the legs are as follows. In a standing pose, never put both feet flat on the ground in a symmetrical perspective to the body. This makes the subject look stiff and creates a boring image. Never position the feet so close together that there's no separation between the legs and thighs. Doing so will make your subject look wider than they are, something almost no one will appreciate. Never do the same thing with each leg, with a few exceptions. The legs can be identically posed when both knees are raised side by side. Don't allow both feet to dangle in seated poses. At least one foot must be grounded, or the portrait will look awkward. The only exception is when you put both feet up on the surface where the subject is seated. In that case, the seating surface visually functions as the ground. Never bring the accent leg so high that it touches the abdomen. Doing this will make both the leg and the stomach area mushroom out in ways that are not flattering. Because of how flexible clients are, or are not, as well as how their bodies are designed, no single pose, no matter how simple it is, will make everyone look good. This is the golden rule of posing. When a client appears to be having a problem with the pose, scrap it and move on. It's not the right pose for them. In the previous chapters, you learned how to pose each part of the body. The next step is to bring everything together to achieve the look and style that will please the client. We've already discussed the element of style in a portrait. Now it's time to put it to work. I begin each session with the client sitting and relaxing. While I talk with them, I analyze their appearance, determining their strengths and weaknesses. Then, no matter the purpose of the portraits, I start off with a casual pose to help them relax. Once I've decided whether any longer images will be done and whether they'll be done sitting or standing, I bring in the appropriate posing aids. These can make it easier to design flattering poses for shots in which more of the body will be included in the frame. I then look at the hair and the accents on the clothing to determine which direction the body should be posed and where the main light should be. As I've already discussed, the body looks best when it's turned to a side view, facing the shadow side of the frame. All that's left to pose, the hands and arms, and feet and legs. Once the basic pose is decided on, I refine it, checking for small improvements that can be made or problems that need to be fixed. When everything is perfect, I pick up the camera and take 10 shots, 6 or 7 smiling, and 3 or 4 with a more relaxed expression. As I shoot, I'm looking at and controlling the predominant lines, which determine the overall feeling of the pose. Until you can identify these lines, you can't effectively pose a subject to achieve the desired look. Here, tilting the camera resulted in lines that are almost all diagonal. In this variation on the image, the predominant lines are more vertical, although the pose still contains a number of diagonal lines to draw your eye to the subject. As I've noted throughout, you really need to understand what you are creating to be able to plan your client's session appropriately. If you just go into the camera room and zip through your 5 favorite poses with every client, you lose and they lose. When you take control over your photographs, you can better produce exactly what your client is looking for. It's at this point that you can consider yourself a professional. You'll also find that when clients are truly satisfied, your bank account will grow. To show this concept in action, I've created the following series of images using the same subject in different styles of clothing and tracking the session from her arrival at the studio. Notice how the background and posing changes as the clothes change, ensuring that each part of the portrait makes sense visually. Each session begins with the client deciding on the ideas that they want and don't want in their session. We have 30 sample books with 24 images in each, showing all the different backgrounds, sets, and posing options. One of the assistants goes over the ideas and options with the client. They list all of the ideas on the client card, along with any notes about possible changes to the selected images. My assistant explains the ideas to me. Then I start working with the client. I demonstrate a variety of poses and let the client pick the pose they like the best. With the client in the pose, the lights are adjusted and the camera position selected. Then my assistant and I make sure the client looks perfect, checking the pose, smoothing the hair, adjusting the clothes, etc. Once the client's hair and clothing are perfect, we start photographing. We check our monitors once the first shot is taken to make sure that everything in the frame is the way we want it. Sales also start during the session. For every full-length image we take, we also create a closer shot of the same or similar idea to appeal to older family members. As the clothing style changes, so do the styles of backgrounds, props, and poses we use. When selecting a pose, remember the areas of the body a client worries about the most. The best poses make the client look beautiful while reducing the appearance of problem areas. Variety is the key to happy clients and large sales. In each session, we have the client change at least 3 times and work with at least 5 different background or set combinations. Although there are many styles within these ideas, the elements all coordinate to create a planned sense of style. So far, you've seen 2 combinations from this shoot: the casual motorcycle setup and the elegant setup. Now we'll look at some more variations from the same shoot. As you watch them, notice how the elements continue to be coordinated as we create a variety of images. This elegant white outfit calls for the classic poses and feminine backdrops and props. From uniforms to dresses to casual outfits, each style of dress needs to be coordinated with the background and posed to create a portrait with a polished look. When posing a small group, start out with the core people. This could be mom and dad, grandpa and grandma, a baby. It all depends on the portrait. Once the core is in place, start posing additional people around it. As you do so, keep your basic composition in mind. In this case, the basic posing structure is a pyramid composition. As you add people to the composition, work toward filling the frame. Remember that there's no reason to do a full-length family portrait if you can say everything you need to say with the faces alone. As you pose the subjects within a group, it's important to keep a similar distance between each person. You don't have to take out a measuring tape, but if one person seems to be farther away from the group than everyone else, they'll look like they don't belong. Tighter groupings suggest intimacy. They also isolate a smaller amount of the background, so they can be used when you don't want to show much of the setting. On the other hand, if your client wants to show more of the scene or wants large props like horses or cars, the grouping can be spaced out to maintain a good composition. As much as possible, avoid having two faces at the same level. This can be challenging with larger groups, but it keeps the composition from looking like a lineup. In a photograph of two people, the mouth of the higher subject should be at about the same level as the eyes of the lower subject. Tilting the subjects' heads slightly toward each other gives a feeling of connection. But don't tilt the tops of their head in so far that their hair is touching. That gives the image what I like to call an "aw shucks" look. One final comment about families and groups. Treat each client with the respect and enthusiasm that you yourself would expect to receive from a professional service provider. While most people can learn posing, style, and composition, it's much harder for some photographers to learn to really care about their clients. But if you can't bring yourself to really connect with them, don't worry. Your clients will find another photographer who can. Posing that makes the client look attractive should be the goal of all professional photographers. It should also be your goal to give your best to every client. Too many photographers pull out all the stops for the beauty queens, but just run through the session for those clients who are more photographically challenged. You won't become the best photographer you can be by making beautiful people look beautiful. You'll become a better photographer when you learn to make everyone look good. Every senior who walks into my studio, whether the child of a mayor or the child of a farm worker, gets my very best, because that is what every client deserves. Because I pull out all the stops with every client, I enjoy the success this profession can bring. If you can develop the ability to see the beauty in each client, you too will enjoy one of the most fascinating professions in the world. I would also urge you to keep in mind that mastering posing is a process that never really ends. Styles and clients' tastes will always be changing and evolving, and you will have to keep up with those changes. In the words of my father, as long as a man thinks of himself as green, he's growing. It's only when he considers himself grown that he begins to die. Once you accept money from another person, you're making a promise to them. A promise that you're good enough to create what they have in mind, and that you'll live up to long-established professional standards. When your poses are tailored to fit the portrait's purpose, coordinate with the overall feeling and style the client wants, and the client looks outstanding, the portraits you create will be worth every penny you charge for them. For more information on all of the techniques presented here, look for the book Posing for Portrait Photography, a head-to-toe guide for digital photographers by Jeff Smith. Now in its second edition, this book is available at www.AmherstMedia.com and wherever photography books are sold. Jeff Smith is a professional photographer and the owner of two very successful studios in Central California. His numerous articles have appeared in Rangefinder, Professional Photographer, and Studio Photography and Design magazines. Jeff has been a featured speaker at the Senior Photographers International Convention, as well as at numerous seminars for professional photographers. He's also written numerous instructional books for photographers. To learn more, check out www.jeffsmithbooks.wordpress.com or join him on Facebook and Twitter.